welcome to another episode of The Game, Season 2, Episode 3. We're a tabletop talk show and podcast brought to you by Dungeon Studios. We go beyond live play and dive deep into every topic from session zeros to campaign heroes. Tonight, our topic is going to be yes and this topic is brought to you by our friendly co-host for tonight, Chuck. So, Chuck, say hi, and why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, since this, I believe, is our first time meeting you, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's first time. So I'm Chuck. I run Dungeons and Dragons games and Pathfinder games and all sorts of different types of tabletop games. And I am a tabletop enthusiast. I love all things tabletop.
Yeah, yeah. How
Yeah.
long have you been playing tabletop games?
Ooh, I have been playing probably since I was about 5 years
Oh,
old, I think.
wow. That's amazing. I mean, you don't hear that too often. So what was your first experience then? Was it D&D?
It would have been D&D. It would have been Dungeons and Dragons Advanced edition, which would have been like 1.5 in a sense. And
Yeah.
then yeah, and I was just a little kid. My a parent at the time had introduced me to it, and I think my first character was a wizard.
Oh, wow. So, okay, you remember your first character was a wizard. Do you remember anything else about your first character?
His name was Ellis. And he had a pet falcon, and I
Oh, that's
don't think I
cool.
cast a single spell the entire time. But
That's a wizard for you.
yeah, it
I
was
love
it
it.
was it was a different world in that those old days. So you didn't get spells all the time, and they were hard to use. And I was 5, so it was like, I picked the hardest character you could possibly imagine to try to play as a kid that was just basically sitting on my belly, coloring the map in and what have you.
So it was your parents that got you into it?
Yeah, it was a parental figure that got me into it. Him and his friends, they really loved doing it. And then so I had that experience. But then I there was a big hiatus, and then I had a big campaign when I was probably about like 12 or so. I think I was 11 or 12, and we had our big first large campaign.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So you had been playing since you were 5. When did you finally decide to start tackling DMing?
Oh man, it wasn't long after that first big campaign. Soon as somebody else was had control of the reins, I wanted also to try them, and I wanted to get a hold of them, see what I could do with something. And that was probably like 15-ish or so.
Wow, that's great. And so you've been doing it ever since.
I've been doing it a lot. There's large pockets of hiatus in between there, and so there's a fairly large hiatus from, I feel like 19 to 24-ish or so, and then I jump back into it full swing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I would say usually between the ages of like 19 and 24, your priorities are probably a little bit different, I would think. So, and then you come back to reality and you're like, D&D was great, or whatever tabletop you're playing. Um, okay, so when we talked last week and we were discussing what subjects we would talk about on the game, you brought up a really interesting topic that we hadn't talked about on our show, which is yes and. And you also mentioned there's a whole other set of variations of yes and, like no but, or what have you. We could go into those. But I wanted to cover real quick what yes and means in the case of you don't know, not you, but our viewers don't know what that means. The way I have understood it is it's like a tool that I think why can't I say the word? I can speak English. Improvisers, improvisationalists. What, I don't know. What's the word? Anyway,
Somewhere
those
in that
guys,
ballpark. Yeah.
those folks, it's like a technique that they use in improv so that, one character starts off and says or does something, and then in response to it, the other person will say or respond in a way that is, yes, just what you said, and now I'm going to add to it and lob it back to you, and it kind of keeps going back and forth and they're building that. Is that kind of your understanding of yes and?
Yeah, so it's a way to pass the ball back and forth on an idea, and it's completely open door, open window policy on the situation where you don't you don't say no to anything involving the idea.
Hmm.
You throw it out there, and somebody at the table catches the ball and goes, "Oh, and there's something else happens." Or like in a case of a DM, somebody at your table says, "I want to flavor something, my spell like this. I want
Hmm.
to, instead of throwing a magic missile, my magic missile is going to look like a giant cupcake or something floating towards somebody's face. And it still does the same effect, but it's flavored differently. And so the DM automatically says, yes. And so they sometimes you'll put something on there that's not mechanical in the game, but it feels really fun. And like something of a cupcake, I would probably leave frosting, like ethereal frosting on this poor creature's face. And
Right.
they'd have to deal with that with the rest of the combat or something.
Right. Yeah, I would say that, I mean, player to player probably would experience this because they have to build off of each other. But I feel like as DMs, as the people who are running the game, I think we're the ones that get caught up in needing yes and more often because our players will just give us like the craziest ideas, right? Like it's the best thing ever and the worst thing ever when your players are just coming up with like, I want a pink pig that can fly and shoot lasers out of its eyes, and it's going to be my pet, and it's going to listen to everything that I say, right? Like that's what players do to DMs. And it's up to us to go, sure, and or say no and then try to figure out, how to work with that, right? Is that your experience with needing yes and?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a yes and is just like the really um marketable phrase on a series of four phrases that kind of help DMs, in our case DMs or improvisationists, um build on something
Mm-hmm.
without ever or without with trying to not say no, straight out
Right.
no.
Right.
Um, so there's like you had mentioned earlier, there are four different ones. It's yes and, yes but, and no
Mm-hmm.
and no but.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like a laser pig that can fly and what have you, and everybody knows that your character's ability to fly can quickly cause havoc inside of a D&D game.
Mm-hmm.
So having a flying pig that's also, a laser howitzer is probably a terrifying concept for a DM. You can rein that back a bit, without having to say, no, you can't have your pig. But
Right. Yeah. That is exactly, I guess, the scenario I'm trying to picture for our audience so they understand the why you would need to understand a concept like yes and or no but or all the other, variations in between. Um so let's dial it back a bit because I mentioned part or not partner to partner, player to player, right? Um if you're in okay, trying to come up with a good example. So I play in a group, and there is one particular person in the group who I feel is he actually takes improv classes, so it makes sense that he is very deep into his role playing. And it kind of threw us for a loop when he first joined the group because we thought we were good role players until he joined, and then all of a sudden he was like throwing us all kinds of stuff, and we're like, how do how do I respond? I don't know how to respond. And it kind of took us a few sessions before we were really understanding how to do yes and with this guy, right? Because he would just throw some crazy stuff your way. So player to player, I want people to understand, like, if player A says, I think we should follow the trail north until we find another clue. The way yes and would work, how would you yes and something like that? If a player says to you and you're another player, I think we should follow the trail north until we find another clue. What's your yes and?
as a player,
Yes.
I would say, hmm. Because that one's like, if we follow the trail north, say we go the trail north, um, yes, and would be something like, yeah, we follow the trail north, and there is a pothole, or and there is a well. Like, what is that well doing there?
Yeah. Yeah.
or you follow the trail north for a short while and you come across a baby giant.
See, now I feel like that's more like player to DM, because
Oh, right, right, yes, yes.
what happens on the trail is up to the DM, right? I guess it depends. A player could be like, "Yes, let's take the trail north and I will investigate for footprints along the way," or something like that, right?
I think I've got a good one. I've got a good one
Okay.
for you. So in one of my tables, I have a bunch of characters that systematically ride another character. Now, that sounds weird, but this character happens to be a giant tree monster, and it
Okay.
kind of lumbers through spaces. So it's quite big. I've given them I've awarded them the coveted large size
That's
trait. So
awesome.
they're big, so they can have a full sized character on them, and it's
Hmm.
not encumbersome to them whatsoever. Um, that I think that's like a we're gonna go to the trail north, and I would like to ride, this giant tree monster here.
That's
And the tree
perfect.
monster says, yes.
Yeah. And if we want to get there faster, I'll polymorph into a giant eagle, or something like that. So
Yeah.
that's, thank you. I needed to figure out a few examples for player to player interaction when it comes to yes and, because that's the kind of stuff this guy threw at us. He would come up with some crazy ideas. We were in an airship battle. This was so funny. We're in an airship battle, and I don't know why he thinks this way. He says, we're a ship flying in the air. Why are there sails only on the top of the ship? Why aren't there sails on the bottom of the ship? Because we were one airship trying to get away from a bigger, faster airship. And so we were in a skill challenge trying to figure out how to get our ship to go faster. And he went, "Why don't we have sails on the bottom?" And so he goes, "I'm going to take this big sheet from my bed, and I'm going to climb down to the underside of the ship, and I'm going to craft a sail on the bottom, because that'll give us extra sails and our ship will move faster." And we all were like, "What?" Like, that is some out of the box thinking. And then as another player, it's like, how do you yes and something like that? Like, yes, and I will help you because I can't think of any other thing to do. Like, I don't know. Is it such a wild thing?
Yeah, I think that and then it gets really complicated when a character wants to give that character an aid action, and
Mm-hmm.
then you're like, "Hey, how are you getting down there to do this?
Right.
Maybe that other character can fly or can turn into like a squid or something, and so they suction themselves to the bottom of the hull and are holding
Yeah.
this character while they're intricately placing this bed sheet on the bottom of
Yeah.
this ship."
But that was such a, I mean, so anyway, my point being, yeah, player to player, guys, folks, if you want to understand how to use that concept, think about it next time you're in a session with your players and somebody else says, "I'm going to do this." What would be your yes and? If you're not already doing it, think about it, because I think the more you practice that kind of thinking, it comes a lot quicker. I feel like, because it just took us a bit. It took us like a good 2 to 3 sessions with this guy before we kind of realized, like, there's so much we could do that we hadn't really thought about until we started yes anding with this guy. So really interesting. The other thing, that the other aspect of it is the yes anding with DM to player. We're starting to talk about that, right? So the example of that would be, I don't know if you watched our show last week. So last week, we had somebody from our Dungeon Studios crew, and there's this kind of inside joke, inside story within Dungeon Studios. They were playing a D&D game, and his character came across this very deep chasm, and he happened to be inebriated during that game. And so his brain went, "I'm going to jump down that hole. It'll be fine." And no one warned him, "You could die." And so he jumped and then he died. So to me, I feel like the yes and of that is like, if the player says, "I want to jump down a 500-foot deep chasm," the DM can go, "Yes, you can do that. And then you will die. Or and then we will calculate damage and see what happens. What do you think about that?
So that sounds like a situation where one of the other sub siblings of Yes and starts to come in, and whether or not
Right.
you want to allow this to happen as a DM. Do you want to fish this guy out of wherever he's fallen into? Do you want to have to resurrect this character? Sometimes as a DM, you got to go, this is gonna be dangerous. Do you want to? And they still want to. That's what they want to do. They roll dice,
Right.
and sometimes, well, most of the time we use dice to get around these problems. If they get a crazy high roll, then as the DM, they still pull it off, whatever they were trying to do. But they something bad happens or something detrimental happens. Maybe it's
There
like
has
the
to be a
cartoon where
consequence,
they
right?
yeah, that's the no and or
Mm.
yes but
Mm.
situation of the situation. If you jump down there, maybe it ends like a cartoon where they're going down and they can hold their hands out and they can hold their feet out and they don't fall to their death, but they're also stuck.
Yeah. That's oh my gosh. I would love to put a player in that situation and see what they do. That's a really good one. I'm gonna remember that. But yeah, so that's a great example of like player to DM, yes and, or vice versa. It could be the DM saying, uh, you see a pile of gold, and behind it you start seeing a dragon's head rising. um Maybe this isn't a great example. I was trying to think of like a the player goes like, yes, I see the dragon's head rising, and I'm going to prepare a spell like banish or something like that. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example of a DM to player. Yes, how does a player go yes and for a DM?
I think normally that like to player to DM because like we want a collaborative story experience. So if you want that, or if your story isn't super linear,
Mm-hmm.
when a character wants to do something that's nutty, or they want to go into this dragon's horde and potentially not come out, a bowel movement. Um, maybe maybe we give them those warnings. They don't do it, or it's the bard, and the bard is going to talk to this thing, and you're going to have to deal with this bard's high rolls and persuasion, um, and they're going to talk to this dragon. Maybe it comes out as, oh, what would be really cool. Sometimes this happens at my tables where somebody at the table says something, from a perspective of their own, and they say, "Do you know what'd be really cool if that dragon was, an avid reader of some sort of content." And so instead of saying no to that, a DM, or in my case, I will say, "Yeah, that's canon now.
Yeah.
This dragon's a fanboy of some poetry or something." So maybe that's how you get around the idea of a red dragon or a big dragon being potentially just a fatal situation for
Yeah.
everybody. You can
Yeah.
just have them, be a fanboy, or be a maybe they don't want you to take their treasure still, but they're willing to talk to you, listen to you. Maybe they'll give you something in replace of your wonderful poetry skills.
Yeah, that's actually a really great example that you gave there. Is I think a lot of DMs will have experienced this where, you have an encounter planned or you have everything planned in your world, and your players come up with the wildest theories that you didn't plan, but they kind of sound better than what you planned, or you like it, or for whatever reason, whatever their theories are, it's good. And so then the DM goes, yeah, that's the yes and. That's just like you said. Yeah. I'm trying to think of some examples. Do you have any examples in your gaming that you would want to go over? I know between you and I, we're probably going to cover the rest of this hour with just fantastic yes and stories.
That's like at the core of tabletop. It's just these weird experiences with nerdy people that their minds are always going a thousand miles a minute. I have one particular thing that's fairly recent in my mind. It's going to stick in there for a while. I think it's like a big hearty meal of stupidity and a strangeness. But I've got situation where one player was talking to another player about um, their characters, or had asked a character about their character's undercarriage.
Oh, uh-huh.
And
You can
so,
cuss on this if on this show if you want to.
oh, good. I was trying to be all, Mr.
Polite.
Rogers on the situation. But
I
so
like
they
the word
they
undercarriage though. Undercarriage is a good word.
so they were asking this character what their dick looked like.
Uh-huh.
And ultimately became canon that now we always have to think about the fact that all drow elves are now packing two instead of one. Um
Really?
yeah.
Ah, that's
So that's
great.
one of those situations where like you just roll with the punches, let them do what they want, and it tends to involve people a lot in the story, even if it's not something regarding um their undercarriage. It could be anything, right? But if you
Mhm.
say yes and to things, it's always going to make people feel like they are in part creating the story, and that's what we want to do at the tabletop. We want to be involving people in the storytelling.
Right. I'm glad that you brought that story up because I have a similar story. Um, in the game that I play in, I am the only female at a table full of guys, and same with the characters. They're all male characters. I'm the only female character, and so we all were in a town. We had had like a few rough sessions, and so we had finally made it to a city. Everybody decided we want to go to like a hot spa, hot what is it? What am I thinking? Hot springs spa kind of a situation. Have a spa day, and so the guys, I said, guys, go ahead, go first. I'll meet you there. And the whole point, it's funny because we kind of pre-talked about this before the show. It took me a little bit to think back why I did what I did. One of the characters, so my character was a little insane. And so she saw the faces of her loved ones in her dead loved ones in strangers, and then would just start talking to them like, oh, that's my brother. My brother's come back for me, even though her brother's dead, things like that. And so one of the other characters, I basically made him, in my brain, he was my dead fiance. I'd forgotten about this when we pre talked about this. So since they were all going to the spa, of course she's going to go, take a little peek and see, like, how's everything looking since we haven't seen each other in a while. And so I did try to find a little hole. I took a peek, and the DM was like, "What are you trying to see?" And I said, "Well, I just want to hear their conversation, but you know, if there's something to see, I'll see it." And so then that's when it came up. Everybody laughed. They're like, "Wait a minute, are we rolling for dick size?" And the DM was like, "Yes, yes, I think we are." And so they all rolled a d20. And what ended up being such a hilarious moment is that the gnome, no, he's not a gnome, sorry, he's a halfling, but he was the one who rolled the highest. And so canonically in our world, he's packing, and now he has the nickname Tripod. And but he and I know that I saw everything that's going on. So I call him Tripod, and he gets a little like, oh, I don't know. It's just really funny. So those kind of moments when you yes and can really carry through like the entire campaign. It's so fun. So yeah, that
Yeah,
happened.
absolutely. Always the
um,
halfling.
yeah. Let's see. I want to talk about some other examples um, where let's start with as you're setting up a campaign and they're creating their characters and they want to ask you like, can my character do this? Can I create a character that has that or this backstory or can has this ability? Like have you ever experienced something like that where a players come to you with some kind of a request and you have to figure out the yes and or the no but, this is allowed in the campaign, this is not allowed in the campaign? Have you had any situations like that?
Yeah, so when I'm making a campaign, I kind of just I put like a high concept on a paper, what I want and what kind of theme it is. If it's a dark grim theme, it's a high fantasy theme. If it's a mix of that, is it, post-apocalyptic or whatever, I give them a base idea, and then I I let them make their characters. Generally speaking, with character creation, I try to be as completely open to whatever they want to do,
Right,
um, regardless of, what kind of race that they're going to be, or species they want to be, what kind of class they want to be. We have our archetypes, but I try to just let them aesthetically be whatever it is that they want to be.
right.
Hence how I get characters that are giant tree monsters, or um,
Exactly.
yeah, things like
I
that.
I
So
had a I brought this up in the show before, but my mother-in-law finally said yes to trying a game, but she said, I want to be a half unicorn, half dragon bard. And there was some, oh, with wings. That's what she said. And I was not about to tell her no when she finally said, yes, I'm going to try D&D. So I'm like, yes, you can be a half unicorn, half dragon bard with wings. I will homebrew that for you. And I did.
I always
So,
find four-legged creatures to be difficult, especially if you're going to do a campaign that's like a dungeon delve.
uh-huh.
For some reason, I get like a thing where I can't imagine a horse being able to like walk up and down stairs, like easily, and
Uh-huh.
it's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
But that's one of the only things that I did have a centaur character at one point that was that I had to give him like multiple different abilities to be able to transverse different spaces.
Uh-huh.
Like I could turn it into, I forget what the creature's called, but it's like a kelpie essentially. It's like
Oh yeah.
yeah, so it's like a
Like a fish
horse
person. Oh wait,
horse water creature.
that's right. Yeah.
So like that kind of thing. So if we had to dive into a thing. The horse didn't drown immediately,
Oh, that's
um,
nice.
and stuff like that. But yeah, I totally forgot your question.
Oh, well, we were talking about as a DM starting a campaign, players coming up with like wild character concepts and how do you yes and or no but handle those kind of thing.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
if you're still thinking of any other scenarios, I have another one. So the game that I run, I had two players come up to me. One of them said, I want a blink dog as a pet. And the other one said, I want an owl bear as a pet. And in both of those cases, again, I'm more on the very lenient side of a DM. I do a lot of yes anding. It can get me into trouble, but I've learned how to manage it. So I just say yes and then I deal with it in the back end. But I told them, yes, you can have these wild animals as pets. However, you will have to train them in game. I had to create like a whole set of mechanics for whatever they wanted to train them to do. And I said, if you don't train them or if you spend long periods not training them, they will go back to being wild. They will be bigger. They will be stronger. They will be violent. They will do things that you don't want them to do, and there could be consequences, right? Especially if you're in a city or whatever. So I made that very clear, and now I have a party that has an owl bear, which is getting ever larger, and a blink dog as a pet.
We have a thing that sometimes I talk to players about, is that you don't pet the owl bear.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's not a pet. It's but
Yeah.
it does seem like, generally speaking, if there is something fluffy
Mm-hmm.
that you, or even if it isn't fluffy, if it's like it looks terrifying, you've described it as terrifying, players will try to Pokemon that creature, and they will
Oh yes.
try to get that creature in the party, even if it means one or two characters die in the process. That's worth the loss.
Yes. Yeah, that has been my experience too. They're like, "Oh, this thing is cute. Let's make it our pet." And I'm like, so yeah, the owl bear definitely has caused some issues because that person hasn't necessarily trained their animal quite as much. The other one, on the other hand, has trained their animal to like I, it got to a point where I really had to adjust the mechanics because they were training this dog to be able to like basically like a police dog, like sniff things out from far away, like, un puzzle things out. Like it's wild. So uh let's see. What about, let's move past, campaign and character creation. So now that you're in the campaign, in the story, uh, what are some things that you've had to uh why can't I think of my English words? Um, what are some things you've had to mitigate with these yes and no
Ooh.
buts? Some really good stories, if there's any that you want to share. Because I have a good few lined up, like probably like four or five.
I would say sometimes you get a request to do something that is like your crevasse like situation where somebody's going to fall to their death or whatever. Um, and you got to kind of peel back on that, or a special item of some sort. Characters, when they want rewards, sometimes they get a little hungry and they want something that's really cool or whatever,
Yeah.
and potentially could cause problems. Sometimes what I do with that sort of thing is I will give them something that's deeply powered down,
Uh-huh.
but is progressible. So if they want a blink dog, yeah, they gotta train this thing, they gotta feed it, they gotta love it, they gotta care for it. If they want a +4 defender or whatever, they're gonna have to maybe assemble it, like maybe you get the
Right.
hilt and it's still useful, but it doesn't really have much going on for it. It's not as useful, it's more useful than a standard weapon.
Right.
Um, One thing I feel like I probably should have mitigated a little bit better is flight and flying apparatus in the campaign,
Uh-huh.
or in my campaigns, because I tend to just give it away like it's made of, it's just health potions.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, why do
One of
you
the
say
things,
that? Because now they have full access to like the world map. Is that
yeah, they can go wherever they want. They can go up, they can go down, they can get themselves into a lot of trouble if they go too far up. And
uh
if I have to follow them up there, then I have to give them consequences of going up there. Otherwise, they'll just keep on going. They'll go wherever that they want, and then I'll
right.
I'll find myself making a new campaign in a different direction, which
Hmm.
sometimes happens. And I'm sure a lot of DMs have found themselves writing an entire campaign and then realizing their players want to go in a different direction. And if you don't mitigate it to a certain extent, you're going to be just writing campaigns every weekend.
Right.
Um, so then you'll follow them and you'll put flying creatures, or maybe you'll give your new or your old monsters the ability to follow them in flight.
Hmm.
But then if they're knocked unconscious, I mean they're falling and they're dropping.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's scary, right? Like I have had um okay. For example, this just happened recently. I don't know if I've talked about this on the show. Um so my players are down pretty much in an underdark area, but I have told them when they first entered this area, they found like a portion of a map. They found uh, pages that were torn out of a book and that they read. And so I had explained to them that this area is highly magical. Basically, residuum, like this high, element is just kind of like coursing through the entire mountain range that they are underneath. And so if they are in a room or a cavern, whatever, a room, and they leave that room and they go to another room, if they tried to travel back to the room that they came from, it is now a different room because every doorway, every hole, every whatever exit and entrance, it's almost like a teleport into another section of this underdark. So I tried to make that as clear as I could. Telegraphed it to them as much as I could through the clues that they found, the map, everything else. Well, after all that, we were at the end of a session, like 10 minutes away from the end of a session, and they found this like watering hole, and they looked down into it, and sure enough there's a way through. There's like a little tunnel, a submerged tunnel. So they decided to send one person to go through to scout it, and I let that person go through, but then when they tried to come back, I was like, okay, if I let that person try to come back, they will be teleported to a whole nother section. They will be completely forever separated from the party, because now it's just going to be like one of those. I can't remember who's the comedian, but when you see that hallway and people are going in and out of doorways and they're never meeting each other, like that's
yeah,
all they're going to be doing for the next 2, 3, 4 sessions until they find each other. So I had to, as a DM, make a call, and I said, you can't make your way back through that tunnel. It won't let you magically somehow. Like I had to come up with a reason why it wouldn't let them through. Luckily, we had 10 minutes until the end of the session. By the time it was over, they were like, wow, that's so weird that he couldn't come back through. And we had to go to find him. And I said, well, that's because, and I had to tell them what I telegraphed again. And they went, oh, yeah, okay. So as a DM, I really had to like, no, no, I'm not going to let you go down this path. I'm sorry.
That's what I was wondering, if one player goes in
Mm-hmm.
and then the other players, so say this player goes for a little bit of a scouting jaunt and they
Mm-hmm.
go too far, when though the rest of the party goes in, do they automatically go into a different um place as well? Like it doesn't lead to where he went. You can't scout this area, right? You can go as far as one area and then the next instance is always something completely random. Is that how it
Well,
works?
so the way that I've worked it is like it's kind of there's like a time shift, if you will. So let's say in real world time, if like 15 minutes had passed, then probably I would have said that they wouldn't have been able to follow him. They haven't quite figured that part out yet, so I'm really hoping we'll see what happens. But yeah, basically each of those doorways after a certain amount of time, like kind of the magnetic waves of everything kind of shift, and who knows, that doorway could lead to the same place, it may not.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying. It's terrifying. I put them in this situation and I went, oh gosh, what did I do? So yeah. This is where the yes and I could have yes anded, but then we're near the end, like they're trying to find the BBEG right now. Do I want to add another 5 sessions of them just trying to find each other? Not really.
Becomes the sub campaign of just being lost. And I
Right.
mean the Underdark is like that though. The Underdark is awful to
Yeah.
navigate.
Yeah. So let's see. I had an instance. So my players, they befriended this magic store owner. And there's a pair of them. So they're a husband and wife. They both live in nearby large cities. So the husband has a shop in this one city. The wife has a shop in this other city, and then they like meet in the middle is where they live. But they have 2 shops. Well, remember the owl bear being the havoc maker that the owl bear could be. The player had suggested, gosh, it would be really nice if I had something like a Pokeball to put my owl bear in every once in a while when I really don't like, if we end up in a city where people are afraid of owl bears, I can put her away or something like that. So I took that away. And next time they went to the magic shop, I happened to describe an item that kind of it described the ability. It sounded like a Pokeball. And she went, ooh, this is interesting. Now, I didn't take into account that she's a rogue, and I didn't think that they would steal from their friendly NPC, but she did. She stole it, and she successfully stole it. Now, this was a very high magical item, and I thought there's got to be, let me think about this. What magic store would not have some kind of anti theft prevention measures? So, what I did, because I didn't think about it in the moment, I thought about it after the fact. She stole this thing, walked out. And I said, okay, there's a curse. There's like a magical curse when they walk through that door. If they walk out that door with any merchandise that belongs to the store and they didn't pay for it, like, when you pay for something at a store and the clerk takes that little tag off so you don't beep through the doorway, that's
Yeah.
basically it, right? So the tag didn't get taken off of this thing. And so it set off a curse. Now, every time that she tried to steal, for like 3 sessions, it was 3 or 4 sessions after this, every time she tried to steal, I made her roll a d20. She couldn't figure out what was going on, but there were consequences. Basically, a lot of these consequences were that every time she tried to steal, she would feel like she was forced to return it and admit what she did and then break down crying every single time. Like, not every single time, but that's just how she rolled a lot. There were other things like, she could keep it, but then she would be like crying for the next 24 hours. There would be things where, she has to go out into a large city square and like yell out to the world something really embarrassing. Like there was all these things that she would have to do. And it took her 3 or 4 sessions to realize this all started when I stole the ball. So that was my, yes, you can steal the ball, but there are consequences. And there are consequences. I'm not in, yeah.
That's almost like a no but or a
Is it a no
no
but?
no no and. It's a no and.
It's a
No,
no
you
and.
can't
Okay.
steal this thing, and this you get this curse, you get
Mhm.
this situation, and that's usually like
Well, but she did
especially like
steal
a
it though. She was able to use it. So that's why I'm
oh,
not.
so she kept the item.
Oh, she kept the item.
Okay, so that's like a that's
Yeah.
a like a uh yes but.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Like, yes, you got the item, but now you're dealing with consequences. Once she figured out that it was cursed, she ended up like talking to the husband store owner, and then got the curse removed and like paid reparations basically. And but it was just so funny. I'm like, how do I can't let this stand. There has to be some way to make sure she knows that this is not okay to steal. Like,
Yeah.
yes, as a rogue you should steal, but not from your friends and the magic shop.
Yeah, have like your little safeties, like your tethers,
Yeah.
to stop them from just like looting the place dry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Players I have found, rogues specifically, will steal anything that's not held down.
Oh yeah.
Like they'll just, especially once they figure out that you're going to be cool with it. And but that's like sometimes those are really great yes and moments or yes
Yes.
but moments. Um, or if they get a bad roll, they get
Mm-hmm.
a no and moment where no and you got caught and now you're getting chased, like, and the rest of the party's trying to figure out what's
Yeah.
going on, like,
Yeah.
but
And
they're
as you're
good.
running away, you stepped in a pile of shit. Like there's just a bunch of
Yeah. That's the bad roll when you get like a nat one, you're trying to run
Mhm.
away from the guards and you just slip on a huge owl bear turd or something.
Yes. Yeah. Oh wow. Oh, I haven't even thought about the fact that this owl bear shits. And they've had this owl bear the whole, oh, I'm gonna remember this now.
What is owl bear? That's an awful question. What does
Right?
owlbear
Is it
shit
like
look like?
the
Is
owl
it cow
pellets?
patty?
Yeah.
It's got
This is
like
a question for audience. If you know, please comment. Um, so this rogue, you talked about stealing, right? That if you just let them. Well, this is my first experience with a rogue who literally wants to pickpocket at least one individual every session. And it didn't take me long to realize I need like a D100 list or something of things in people's pockets, because it's not always going to be interesting stuff in people, like you're going to pickpocket and you find a clue every single time. No. So I basically um, came up with this whole list, and I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I was just like random stuff, lots of random stuff. Well, they were in this town and they were talking with this it's not a Kuatoa. It was like a Triton. It was like a fish person. I think it was a Triton. And she pickpocketed. And so I rolled on it. And one of the items was a cattail. And I just, without thinking, I'm just reading the items off. And then they go, there's a cattail in this person's pocket. And I just went, well, yes. And then so she started kind of like doing research, trying to figure out like why a cattail, why is there a cattail in his pocket. I literally had to come up with like canonical reasons. And now the Tritons, they just like humans think that rabbit feet are lucky, Tritons have this very strong affinity to the like feline entities and think that everything to do with felines is good luck. And so that's why this person had a cattail in their pocket. Like, I just, why would I ever have to think about this except for the fact that my player likes to pickpocket all the time? And then I put that stupid thing in this list.
oh man, those are good moments too though, because you can really turn that into a whole story, right?
A
Like
whole
you like
story.
so they love cattails, but does that mean that they also distrust or naturally distrust bobcats? Because
They don't
They
have
don't have
tails.
tails.
See, yes, there's so much you could do, all because of a yes and.
Yeah.
And I haven't even thought about that. And now I'm gonna think about that. Yes, if you
Um,
don't have a tail, that's interesting.
I always keep on me a list of mundane objects that are just random things that have almost no meaning to them, and you say, "What does this mean to you, character?" And that's
Ah,
your yes and moment, where they can then look at it and be like, "Hey, why did you give me this trinket of a maybe it's got a lock of hair in it or something, or maybe it's got like a picture of, you know, two or three people, two of which are happy and one of which is like ominously staring at them for some reason. Like what is going on here? And they want to pick it apart and they start the table starts, you know, throwing random ideas out. Or maybe there's like a picture of a person just like a Xerox to butt cheeks, you know,
yeah,
like they open up this locket and it's just like somebody's butt cheeks. They're like, the hell's going on here?
that's amazing. So, and then you just let them come up with the lore for this stuff?
So- Sometimes like it comes out of, you know, sometimes it comes out of me, sometimes it comes out of them. Like it's yes and is at its core a phenomenal tool to use to just fill out world building,
Yeah,
like weird
yeah,
little world building objects.
yeah. I actually I'm still kind of learning to let my players do more of that kind of world building. The guy I mentioned, that's like the improv guy, right? So he's played in one of my games before, and I already knew about him that he likes to add to the world. So I basically gave him the rule, that's fine. Like, make up whatever lore you want to make up about whatever you're interacting with, and I will just veto anything that I think might be world breaking or plot breaking, but sure, whatever. And some of the most interesting moments have come out of this guy's mouth. He played a teenage girl, right? He played a teenage girl who was like a know-it-all, but also like got good grades, like, but teenager, right? So they're very annoying. And so this teenager basically goes into, a store and sees something and hears people talking about it, and she just walks up and she's just like, well, this came from this era of blah 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 because of da da da, and just he just would come up with stuff on the fly, like the whole history of this one item that NPCs were interacting with. Like, I it was so great. He created a candy shop, and imagine taking cotton candy, and then he said basically there was a dragonborn who blew flames on it and was like spinning it like glass art basically, and then it turns into like a lollipop because all that sugar burns down, and it was like a phoenix pop or something. Like, it was the coolest description ever, and now that is canon in my world. Like, it's so cool. So yeah, let your
So much fun.
players come up with some of it. Like, I would never have been able to come up with that. So that was so
I
cool.
I, I avidly believe that world building happens at the table level
Yeah.
because like as one person, as the GM, as the DM, you can only come up with so much before you need to like fill in the cracks with like these weird, fun little nuancy things that only another person looking at your work from, you know, a different viewpoint could possibly come up with. Like why
Right.
would these things exist? And now that they exist, how much richer is your world because you just said, sure, why
Right.
not?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's a lot in my world that they have added into. Like, I would never have probably let a Goliath be a gunslinger. And my one of my players said, yeah, I want to be a Goliath and I want to be a gunslinger. And I was like, oh, all right. So I do have guns in my world. All right. Why would a Goliath be a gunslinger? Like, how's that going to work? And it ended up, I can't talk too much about this because we're still playing in this campaign, but the plot that came out of that ended up creating almost all of the BBEG's backstory. Let's just say that. And it makes sense in my world. I mean, not every Goliath is a gunslinger, but this one is, and there's a perfectly logical reason why he is, and it makes sense. And I love it.
maybe he was rubbish at bow and arrow, and he's just like, I don't know, I can't always be up against the enemy. Maybe I need to be able to hit him early on, but really hard with like, I don't know, a cannonball coming out of a gun.
That's a good reason. That wasn't it. Actually, I can talk about the backstory if you wanted to hear it. But basically, there are only a handful of like master artificers. And so where the Goliaths live, it's all mountain ranges and stuff. But up in the very north of that area, there's like some civilization, and there was one of these master artificers that basically went up there to kind of hide because once you hit that level, people want you for everything. They want you like the military, right? Like we want
Yeah.
all the shit that you build. So he basically kind of went into hiding on his own little estate up there. And then BBEG stuff, which I can't get into, but a lot of the Goliaths kind of got like ran out of that area. And so him and his dad, the player and his dad, kind of escaped. And then the dad kind of wandered onto this property, got shot because he looked like someone who was, going on, didn't belong on this property. And then once the artificer realized, like, oh, I didn't mean to shoot you. There's a little boy, a little Goliath boy here. Let me patch you up. And now they became friends. And now, that's where they kind of hid out for the rest of his childhood. So he grew up with guns. Like he was the one Goliath that grew up with guns. It totally makes sense in my world.
Why not, right? It's
Yeah,
fantasy.
exactly. Um, let's see. So were there any situations? I know we've talked a lot about like the yes anding, but what about some situations where you had to say no? And then what did you do about it?
Oh, I'm sometimes I can be too liberal with the yes anding, or like the just giving them stuff and then dealing with the consequences later and being like, oh man, I should say no more often.
Yeah.
But I think a couple times there's a time where a player wanted to have um or wanted to be able to jump across a cliff,
Hmm.
and it was just too far. And I told them, it's like 120 feet. Like you're not gonna be able. And it was meant to be a barrier so that they didn't have anywhere to go. They had to either, go left, go right, and not go back. They had to make a choice quickly. But it always turns into like, I don't want to make the choice quickly. I just want to do what I want to do.
Right.
But this character wanted to jump off or jump across the cliff because I, offhandedly mentioned that there is another cliff face on the other side, and should have just said there was nothing there.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what happens to me too. I'm like, wow, why did I say that?
I could have just, mitigated my own suffering if I just said, no, 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 that's the only option, because that was what
Yeah.
I wanted.
Hmm.
But you tell them no. And I found that if you tell a player no, they feel a little bit deflated.
Yeah.
So instead, I always have us, I don't want it to happen. I don't want them to jump or try to jump off the cliff. Um, so I say, okay, make me a roll. And even if they can't, it's physically impossible for them to jump across this cliff. Like they're not a flying creature. They have no ability to fly. Um, I want to say no. So they jump and they make a roll and they get a nat 20. And then now I have to deal with that nat 20.
Yeah.
And what it means in D&D, it kind of takes the wind out of the GM's control mechanism, which is good and bad at the same time.
Hmm.
Um, so I give them a less severe option. Like in this case, a barbarian had been jumping, and he was just saying, "Oh, I'm gonna use my athletics, and I'm gonna flap my arms." It was just the most ridiculous thing you could ever hear. And so they jump across this cliff, get their nat 20, and now I'm like, damn it. Now I have to make this okay to happen.
Hmm.
So what I did was I had this air elemental,
Hmm.
like just kind of like meandering through the chasm. It's like not doesn't know that this person's trying to jump across. It's just like going to work or something. And this air elemental's swooping through this chasm and hits this guy
Oh no.
and flips him up, and he starts careening through the air. And
Mhm.
because he got a nat 20, I got to make it look like, somehow that he did do this. I give him a little bit of damage for getting hit by the air elemental. He doesn't careen to his death, and he does make it onto the other side. Unfortunately, now I gotta, decide what's on the other side of this chasm very quickly.
Right. Right.
And he's got to land on his feet because it's got to be almost cartoonish the way that he has succeeded in the situation. Now, if they get a nat one, or a fail of any kind, obviously my no stands,
Right.
and they either careen to their death, or maybe they have one last chance to claw to the or cling to the chasm or whatever, the side of the chasm wall. Um, Generally speaking, I don't do a lot of just like straight up no's unless it's going to break everything.
Right.
Like if it's
Yeah.
going to break my campaign, and it's going to stop the flow of the game, then I'll have to say no. Um, but then I'll just tell them there's no possibility of you being able to do this. Um, but maybe you could, think of an alternative route. Talk to your player guys. I'll give you guys one full round, to just discuss amongst each other.
Yeah.
Maybe they try to go down or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I got to make something that's down. Or hopefully they just take the hints and they go left or they go right. Because they
Yeah.
have they have a perfectly good path to each side of them. And the bad guys are coming towards them. They're pushing them off the cliff, right?
Yeah. 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 I totally hear you about I do also say yes more than I say no. And I honestly don't know if my players know that about me. And so they push the boundaries on purpose, or if it just feels that way. I honestly think it feels that way. I don't think they're actually doing this to me on purpose. It's just really funny. But there is one thing that I can think of that I did a firm no on, and that was my son. I think I've talked about this on the show before too. But my son wanted to play D&D in our group, and so he's our youngest player. He's now 15, but when he first started, he was 8, and I had him create this backstory for his character, and the backstory that he created was just like, of course everybody who creates a D&D character has at least one tragic backstory, right? But as an 8-year-old, this was probably the most tragic backstory I had ever heard. He had a wife, and they had a baby, and then just as they had a baby, they both died, and he went insane from them dying, and that was it. And I'm just like, you're 8, buddy. I'm not gonna tell you that I'm saying no, but behind the scenes, your wife and kid are alive. It's taken now, he's 15. So we've been playing that long. Oh my gosh. But anyway, he's 15. So he's just now recently in the campaign figured out that his wife and his kid are actually alive. And like in this magical stasis somewhere, kind of like, Sleeping Beauty. But I just remember at 8, he's 8 years old, and I'm like, bro, I am not gonna let you have this tragic backstory. I'm sorry. I'm your mom. No.
Maybe lighten it up a little bit, pal.
So that was probably the only time I can really think of where I was like, that's a hard no. I didn't tell him that. I just waited for him to figure out, because I'm like, you're not gonna have a sad ending. You're not gonna be the hero of this world and then still not have your wife and your baby. Like, I'll at least give you that.
I definitely, so even if I say yes more often than I should, the consequences in my games tend to be fairly concrete,
Mm-hmm.
and players die probably more frequently than is normal in D&D 5e. Like
Mm-hmm.
I will kill
So death is a
players.
thing. Okay.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's and because I tend to do grim dark kind of
Yeah.
stuff, so it's like as much as comical things happen, I won't shy from killing off a player, especially if they've done a couple things that have slowly pushed them into that realm of reality that they're just not going to be able to get away from it sooner or later.
Yeah.
You can only harass the dragon so long before it makes you into, bones in its poop.
Yeah. I love that you keep bringing that up, which is so great. I still got to think. I'm I'm still trying to figure out what, because okay, Bear bear poop is like berry poops, right? And then owls are like the little, like you get the little skulls and bones and stuff in there, right? That's terrifying if you think about the size. And what if it was a little bit of both? Like berries and bones. I don't know.
I mean, you like bears eat everything.
Yeah.
So the having bones in their poop probably wouldn't be the craziest thing.
I
Um,
just, we're probably harping on too much about it, but I just can't not think about it,
that,
folks. I'm sorry.
that's
Uh,
100% what D&D is about, being way too concentrated on the weirdest stuff.
yes, that's okay. Yes, ending, folks. Okay, if you are like us, because we haven't had Russell on the show yet or Doc this year, who are my curmudgeons that like to say no to a lot more things than I do. So it's been very interesting to have Chuck here on the show with me. I feel like we two are very similar DMs, and if you're going to follow the realm of yes and learn from our mistakes, because you're right, I have so many times described a room, and there's no need for me to describe that there's also a desk over here. Like the desk has nothing in it, but the second I mention the desk, we're focusing on that desk for like 30 minutes because I'm yes anding because I happened to say that there was a desk and now they're very interested in this desk. And guess what? Not only am I going to let them investigate this desk for 30 minutes, now I've got to think of something that's cool in the desk because why else did I mention a desk? I don't know. Have you like I have
You're
literally
like,
gone
it's
down a
it's
rabbit
just a
hole.
desk.
Yeah. No, see, I don't. I mean, well, every once in a while I will because I do keep track of how long our session is, and like I kind of have a way of making sure that we get like hit a certain narrative point by the time we hit the end of the session. But sometimes, yeah, it goes off the rail like that. And I mentioned a desk, and now they're focused on it, and now I got to put something cool in the desk, and now they found the cool thing, and now they're spending another 30 minutes on the cool thing, and now I got to figure out why that cool thing is cool and what is it, where does it fit in this plot. it just it goes off the rails real quickly. So learn from us, okay? Maybe say no more. Maybe that's the rule we're trying to tell you guys. Maybe not.
Pepper it in there. Pepper it in
Yeah,
there from time to time. If you're
every
gonna
once in a while.
season your stuff with yes and, maybe put some no buts in
No
there.
buts every
No
once in a
buts.
while. Yeah, so let's talk about no but just for a couple minutes here. So I want to try to give a good example of a no but. I think we talked about it already, but let's say a player, I've actually experienced something like this where it's like, okay, I can only speak common and elvish, but this thing, as a DM, I've already told them they can't read it, right? And they'll be like, well, maybe I can read it because and they start trying to like come up with a good, logical reason. Let's say the runes are written in, they're giant runes, okay? So they're like, well, I did come from this area, and there are giants that are known to be in that area. And what if I spent time and they start kind of coming up with this whole spiel? Have you ever had that happen to you? And then do you say, okay, sure, yeah, you can kind of read giant runes, or like, have you had that situation?
So that's you circling around to yes again.
That is,
You're
right?
like trying
It is.
to just say yes again. You can. I mean, obviously, as the GM, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Um, but a no but would be like, um, you don't know how to read this. You don't know how to decipher this particular text. Um, but it does appear slightly mechanical, or it appears
There you go.
maybe it appears like there is something tangible that you can, rather than not um that they can't interact with it at all. Maybe it's like they have to touch it, or they notice evidence along the lines of like maybe it's activated by, I don't know, spit or
Yeah.
something. Like
Yeah. Oh,
they've got
you
to spit
noticed a
on it.
speck
So
of blood on. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I was gonna go with blood. You went with spit, but that's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
something like that, so that they have something to cling on to, and they can still interact with the thing that you put there, but it's not in the same way.
Yeah.
So they have to, and they will never know what it is, whatever it is that they just put on there.
Yeah.
but they get to interact with.
I like that. That's a great way to explain it. Thank you. Because yes, you're right. I was circling. See, it's like innate, folks. I just want to be able to say yes, but I really should be able to say no, and that's how you do it. Follow this guy's advice. um, do you have anything else that you wanted to cover on the topic?
Oh man, we could
We
talk
could,
for hours and hours and hours and slowly circle around and come back, and we'd be only halfway through.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um,
I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I feel like I talked your ear off on that one.
yeah, I think we covered some ground. We
Yeah.
covered a fair amount of ground tonight for sure.
Let's just put it this way, folks. If we missed something, then put it in the comments. If you have a question about something, like what's an example of one of the other situations, what is it? What did we say? Yes and, yes but, no and, no but, right? So if you have any questions on those scenarios, put them in the comments, and then I'll have Chuck answer you. Maybe,
Maybe.
because he probably has some better examples on this than I do, because I just say yes and to everything. That's been established. So anyway, folks, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I promised I would try to keep these to an hour. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe, make sure that you like, make sure that you share with your friends, because our shows air on YouTube Tuesdays, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, about 2 p.m. New Zealand time. I will confirm that with Russell when he comes back. So if you are subscribed, then you can find those videos and then make sure that you hit the little, notification, notify me when we go live at that time. Otherwise, come find us on Discord. We're a community of creatives and we like to chat with you guys. So come find us. And usually the links are in the YouTube videos. So you can find the link to Discord, meet us there, say hi, chat about D&D, tell us how we're wrong about yes and no but. Chuck, is there any place that people can find you if they want to chat with you?
Oh, I'm on your guys' Discord as well, so I'm kind of hanging around there from time to time. I'm also on startplaying.games, where I post my games and try to fill tables full of creative, like-minded human beings.
That's right. You're a pro DM, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So if you need a game, you can find him in our Discord or at sorry, what was that again? I was paying
Well,
start playing.
startplaying.games.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap it up. So just remember that these days can be fun days when you talk nerdy with friends, like I've been talking with Chet. Thank you guys for listening to our episode tonight, and I will see you next